it makes it more challenging when you have laws in place, no matter what it's affecting, when they are so out of step with reality, but people are unaware of the law. We had lawmakers tell us, that's not right, that can't be true.
There was one lawmaker that said that's not true.
Yeah,
And we were like,
Wow.
I don't remember who it was, but they were like, no, that's not true. And we're like, yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, as though we didn't have our facts straight. That's how shocked people were that this law was in existence.
My fertility journey, along with my wife's, began about 10 years ago. It was a battle. We were lucky enough to have a son through this journey. At one point, when we were looking at options for how to move forward, egg donor, sperm donor, surrogacy came up. We were shocked, utterly shocked, to learn that there was a 1988 law in Michigan that criminalized compensated surrogacy. That was mind-blowing to me. We're here today to talk about ultimately the repeal of that law, the replacement of that law. Both of you interacted with this law at some point. How did you come across this? When did you discover that this law even existed?
For me, it was a very jarring, shocking experience. I was in a hospital recovery bed, recovering from a near-fatal ectopic pregnancy, and that was saved my life, surgery did. And a quick Google search led me down the rabbit hole that Michigan had a criminal and civil ban on surrogacy, and it was life-altering from the standpoint that how could I live in the only state in the country with a criminal ban on something that's helping people in 48 other states start or grow a family.
And mine was because I was diagnosed with unexplained infertility after going through several rounds of all sorts of, assisted reproductive technologies. And so I live in the UK, but I grew up in Michigan. And so my thought was, when we were looking initially at surrogacy, that we would do it in Michigan, because in the UK, it's a much different process. And I found a clinic and I said, I'd like to do it in Michigan. My mother at that point still lived here. It just seemed to make sense. And they were like, you can't do it in Michigan. And so in the end, my children were born through surrogacy in Illinois, but it always kind of stuck in the back of my brain that, like, well, hold on, this is so strange. And even in our surrogate's contract, it said that she couldn't come to the state of Michigan after she entered her second trimester. And that would be because if she happened to have given birth in Michigan and they knew that the child was born through surrogacy, it would be all sorts of legal consequences. So that was also quite jarring to see in a legal contract saying she cannot set foot in the state of Michigan while she's pregnant with our children.
Yeah, I found it was just so shocking that the doctor that saved my life, who then also told me surrogacy was going to be the only option for us to have any more children, I have my son naturally. It was just still shocking to realize that something that you thought was just a given or available to you.
A treatment option.
A treatment option. I mean, surrogacy is a very, I don't want to say normal, but
normal for us.
Very normal for us. But it is an effective treatment for infertility. So for many people, surrogacy is their, much like Ginanne, myself, surrogacy is their final option. I mean, you have done everything else to get to that point. And it's just so imperative that our laws reflect how families are built and grow today.
The Michigan Fertility Alliance was born out of this experience, correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that founding?
Yeah, in 2000, so when my journey to surrogacy started in 2016. I didn't realize at that point that it was for sure going to be surrogacy, that how we were only going to be able to grow our family. I actually had a medically unexplainable reoccurrence of the same type of ectopic pregnancy in 2018. So after I had recovered from the traumatic experience in 2016 that nearly took my life, and I was in ICU for a week, after many, many fertility specialists, I was told that I could still carry a pregnancy, I just couldn't go through the labor process. And then in 2018, I found out we were pregnant, and about 4 weeks later, because I was being monitored so highly, It was a reoccurrence of, it's called a corneal ectopic pregnancy. And I won't get into detail, but it's very rare. So at that point, we knew that surrogacy was going to be the only option. So 2018, from the Google search of needing surrogacy, I figured I'm just going to hitch my wagon to someone else doing this work, another organization. And I like to say MFA was founded accidentally, and I really do mean that. Not that it wasn't purposeful and we're not doing amazing work, but it was never what I felt was a mission. I knew that my life had been saved for a reason. I didn't really know yet what that reason was. I was still grappling with that. I think many people that experience near-death experiences, they spend many years trying to figure out why their life was spared. Mine was spared definitely to fight for people who don't know infertility is going to be part of their story. They're too weak, they're too tired, they're too sad, whatever the case is. And that's really how MFA was founded. When I realized no one in our state, no organization was doing that work specific to advocating for people who need assisted reproduction, which includes surrogacy and IVF, to start or grow a family, I kind of got down to business. And in 2019 we became more formal in the sense, started to actively gather stories I knew there had to be hundreds of other or thousands of other families in Michigan that felt the same kind of feeling. 1 in 6 people suffer from infertility, and that's medical infertility. That doesn't even include social infertility. We just started the process of kind of cataloging and gathering stories. That's when I met Ginanne.
Well,
So this is like this is the part where like it comes together of how the work and like met this amazing human that has helped MFA become, what it is today.
Yeah.
So I, after my twins were born, so I'm a journalist based in the UK, and my book agent sort of said to me during the pandemic, would you maybe be interested in finally writing a story about your surrogacy experience? And my thought was, well, a lot of people have written books about their surrogacy experience. It's unique to me, but not really a unique story to many people.
Sure.
But I thought, well, why don't I deep dive? What's missing in kind of the sort of literature out there about surrogacy and IVF? And it was that nobody had done a book looking at surrogacy globally. So looking at, who are surrogates? How do children born for surrogacy feel about it? What about the problems in places like India and Thailand? Are there international organizations trying to, create sort of international sort of laws or ideas about how surrogacy should go? So anyway, in doing that, I sort of started looking at what was happening in the United States and remembered obviously about Michigan. Because being from here, it sort of struck a chord.
Sure.
And so I interviewed a couple of women who had interviewed Stephanie for a podcast, and they said, oh, there's this woman in Michigan working on this, to reform the laws. And then I found out that we were from the same hometown, and I was like, well, we're both Flint girls, so Flint girls get stuff done. So anyway, we had a conversation, and we just hit it off right away. And it was one of those things where we just started chatting, and over time, I interviewed her for the book. And then over time, we talked like pretty much from the moment we met every day since. And at one point, sort of 6 months down the line, she sort of said, hey, you're giving me all this help. Do you want to kind of come on board officially as one of the people who's on our leadership board? And I was like, yes. And that's kind of where I came on board. So I finished the book because I felt like there was that kind of journalistic ethics thing,
Absolutely.
books coming out in January, but then decided that I really wanted to pursue being involved in the work on this bill. And so that's kind of where that came from. So.
And my joke is, together we make one really smart person.
But like motivation and for at least 4 people, enough between you.
Oh, yes, for 4 people and probably more. But for me, I think it was almost like a sisterhood. I feel that way. I feel very strongly about my connection with Ginanne. It was but even above, I had, professionally had a lot of success, but I never connected with someone on a level, like a heartstring level, and also where our mission is the same. Like, we're gonna keep doing the work no matter what, come hell or high water. And that was why it worked so well. And that's why
we're both quite type A.
We're like very type A people. And but we also complement each other. Our skill set complements each other. Ginanne is such a beautiful and amazing and talented writer. I'm an engineer. My brain is engineer driven, project driven. Ginanne's is so eloquent in writing things, and she manages our newsletter and so many other things. But outside of all that, just emotional support. I don't think people have a grasp the level of stress and anxiety and really sweat equity and tears and sacrifice that go into reforming a law and putting the work in. And
we certainly didn't know.
We were clueless.
We were like,
I mean, people,
oh yeah, let's change the law.
I mean we knew, but at the end of the day, in my soul, in my bones, I knew we were going to get this done one way or the other. I didn't care if it took 40 years. I don't care how. We were going to get this done by educating one person at a time, educating that this is what this really looks like. This is not, what you see on TV. It's not the celebrities using, surrogacy.
Right.
And that's the issue in Michigan, because the law was so stifling to our state. Mind you, it was in place for almost 35 years. And assisted reproduction and need for IVF and infertility care had grown light years from where it was left frozen in time in 1988.
Right.
So infertility and surrogacy, especially in Michigan, it was misrepresented and it was underrepresented.
And the thing that I always like to sort of, bang on about is that, doing research for my book, I didn't realize what a pivotal part of surrogacy history has happened in Michigan, because Michigan was the first place in the world that we understand in 1976 that a compensated surrogacy contract was signed. It was the first place in the world where a child was born through a gestational carrier. So surrogacy, there are two different kinds. Traditional surrogacy, which is where the surrogate is also the egg donor. And there's also gestational surrogacy, where it's the embryo of the intended parents that is implanted into a surrogate.
Right.
And so the first child born through that was born in Michigan. The first judge in the world.
Before 1988 then?
Yes.
Yes, that was in 1986.
Yes.
Jill Brand, who actually supported our bill.
Was the 1988 law then a reaction to some of the science that was being done?
Exactly.
Okay.
So there was a lawyer called Noel Keene who was based in Dearborn, and he was the one who in 1976 did that first compensated surrogacy contract. And then he kind of saw, oh wow, this is actually like a way to kind of, this is a business.
Yeah.
And so he, over the years, a lot of the surrogacies were taking place in Michigan because he was based here, but it was for couples all over the world.
Of course.
And so, he was the one that also did the contract for the first gestational surrogate. He also was the person who did the contract for the Baby M case, which was a big case in the 1980s of a traditional surrogate in New Jersey who gave birth to a little girl, and she fled to Florida with that child. And it was a huge case. I remember it. I was in high school at the time, and everybody, it was, on the cover of Newsweek. It was just a
What
huge.
year was that?
That was, I think it was 85, 86, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And the New Jersey Supreme Court in the end ruled that the father, the biological father, was, would have custody. But anyway, so then Michigan was like, whoa, what's been happening here?
Right.
It's been kind of, this whole, there are all these surrogacies that are happening and there's no law in place. And so there was a senator who created this 1988 law to stop essentially Noel Keene, this lawyer, from doing surrogacy. And so that's why that law was put in place. So Michigan went from being sort of at the forefront of surrogacy, all these things that were happening here. In some ways a positive way, in some ways not so much, and then all of a sudden, 1988, boom, it stopped. And the irony, which I always think is so funny, is that, so the senator was a woman called Connie Binsfeld. She's the one that wrote the law. Jim Blanchard, who was the Democratic governor at the time, signed it into law. And when we had our hearings in the Senate, one of the Senate building that we had them in was the Connie Binsfeld Senate building. Wow. So I was like, okay, this is sort of, the world's coming back. But anyway, so that's sort of Michigan's very interesting, rich and deep history.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and that's why that law came into place. And that was the first law in the United States that made surrogacy a felony, and we were the last state that still had a felony on the books for surrogacy.
Correct. So, and obviously you can also tell Ginanne is an amazing researcher. So that's the other beautiful,
I don't even have to ask any questions. I can just.
The beautiful aspect of what, in terms of the skill set and all the stuff, the fascination to the topic that was brought to the table. She did the first interview, the first world exclusive interview with the first child born through gestational surrogacy ever. And it's just important to get that kind of perspective into the work that we're doing, because it makes it more challenging when you have laws in place, no matter what it's affecting, when they are so out of step with reality, but people are unaware of the law. We had lawmakers tell us we've had Michigan Fertility Alliance was the first organization in Michigan to hold Advocacy Day around infertility, where we met with over 50 lawmakers with 100 advocates, one of the largest advocacy day in the country.
It's huge.
It's huge. And you know, we put that advocacy day together with, you know, like bubblegum and shoestring. We have no budget. We are a grassroots organization. You know, hopefully that's changing in the near future. It was sweat equity. And we had lawmakers on both sides of the aisle tell us, like, that's not right. That can't be true.
There was one lawmaker that said that's not true.
Yeah,
And we were like,
Wow.
I don't remember who it was, but they were like, no, that's not true. And we're like, yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, as though we didn't have our facts straight. That's how
Sure.
shocked people were that this law was in existence, because they didn't understand why or how. And just to kind of go back on what Ginanne had touched on with the Baby M case and the law being written, which, you know, there's an LA Times article where they're on record saying they wrote it to put this attorney out of business, which he just picked up shop and moved to another state.
Yeah.
But it was also what happens when people write laws like in a dystopian fear, right? It was kind of on the heels of the Jack Kevorkian era with the, you know, assisted.
And Michigan at that time, there was a professor from Wayne State who said that was kind of, at that time, Michigan was kind of doing laws that were to stop one person.
Correct.
He used
Right.
Jack Kevorkian as another example. So it was kind of like, let's just like get this done because we don't want this to happen. And I think, you know, I did interview Jim Blanchard, you know, former Governor Jim Blanchard, about the law and ask him, why did you sign this? Because, you know, you were a Democrat and, you know, whatever. And he said to me, you know, at the time, it was so Frankenstein. We just wanted to stop what was happening because there was no control.
Yeah.
And so he said, you know, and it was interesting because he said, in hindsight, I have some very dear family friends who, you know, use surrogacy to have their child and whatever. And he was sort of very surprised that Michigan still had that law on the books. So it was just interesting to kind of find out what was happening here in the late 80s.
That is fascinating. To me, it was a ban without nuance. Like probably they could have approached it from a regulation standpoint or at least a legal framework, you know, some sort of enhancement to what was happening in reality, but they opted to take the easy road and just ban it.
Well, they did in a sense. You know, it is important to note that there was a loophole in the 1908 law which allowed gestational carrier surrogacy to continue in Michigan with zero legal regulations for anyone involved in the surrogacy, including the child, the intended parents, and the gestational carrier, so long as there was no compensation exchanged. Altruistic, which, you know, that word for us, we try to not use the word altruistic.
I'm sorry.
No. This is an education moment that we were inaccurately using it until we started to get into, as you just said, the nuances. The carrier who carried my daughter, she was compensated, but it was from an altruistic place.
It's not the antithesis of compensation.
Exactly.
It's not the synonym.
It is not the, and that's what we kind of, just saying that gives me goosebumps because you just got it. That's the truth. And it kind of, when we use the term altruistic as the antithesis of compensation, it perpetuates the idea that women are doing it for compensation. They're not. Childbirth.
And even if they are, that's okay.
And yes,
you know?
even if they are, that they're okay. It's just, it negates the fact that childbirth is a life-threatening action regardless. I mean, it is dangerous no matter how you slice it. So these women are taking on a huge risk to do something for someone else. So that's kind of the tricky part when we nuance the word altruistic. So we refer to it as non-compensated.
Got it.
So in Michigan, they allowed for non-compensated surrogacy, which in the law that, you know, we have written and passed, it still allows for that, but it has no protections in place. And that was the scary part, is the state of Michigan would view the gestational carrier as the parent and the gestational carrier's spouse. And that's concerning because when emergency decisions need to be made I mean, we could go on forever about why that isn't right. So it is important to discuss that there was this loophole that was intended for a woman's sister or relative to carry for them, which is also a gross misstep in the fact that it assumes women have an all-access pass to another woman who can carry a pregnancy for them, not realizing pregnancy to become pregnant is not easy for everyone.
No.
And from a global, just as a global perspective, I mean, Michigan was kind of the outlier in the United States. But
Yes.
for example, so as I said, I live in the UK as well. So our children were born here. They had US passports. But for them, in order to get British passports, we had to go through, essentially, we had to, in the UK, our children were viewed as the children of our gestational carrier and her husband. So we had to go through a couple of court hearings. So it's unique in Michigan, or sorry, in the United States, but pretty much for the rest of the world, this is how it is. That it's usually, and it's very sexist because it's always like the biological father is considered the biological father at birth, but the biological mother, even though because she didn't give birth, she's not considered the mother at birth. So I mean, it's so, you know, for example, UK, Denmark, Ireland, other countries, they sort of have this sort of system, and that's why they're wanting to change laws in many countries. Denmark's changing their law in January of 2025. Ireland, I think, has looked into it. The UK has looked at doing reforms. So I mean, there is an understanding that this just is not the right way to go.
We don't want to
Absolutely.
exceptionalize children that have a biological connection to their parents, because many children don't, for for donor conceived, all the things we've just talked about.
Right.
So it's making sure that we are acknowledging children and we are acknowledging parentage based on intentions to parent, and providing children the rights to the parents who intend to parent them, regardless of their biological connection to the parent themselves. And so what a lot of people don't realize is our laws in Michigan were very much rooted in paternity and biology. And that isn't the case anymore. Just like surrogacy is very common. I mean, so many children are born through IVF every year, and so many of those children are born through, there's a donor gamete on one side or the other, or maybe both. So that's kind of the other portion that we really remind people of, is to think about the vulnerability of the children born through assisted reproduction and make sure that we are addressing those vulnerabilities with laws that, for instance, the Michigan Family Protection Act, it legalizes surrogacy, but it also serves the parentage piece. So thinking about it, kind of like flipping the whole discussion onto like, how do we protect the child?
Yep.
That's kind of what we grew, right? Our work kind of mushroomed into. We, you know, initially were just so shocked by the surrogacy law and laser focused in fixing that. And then through this, we kind of built this amazing arsenal and coalition of amazing people doing hard work, and experts and people who were never going to take no for an answer. And that's kind of the direction that we took in terms of addressing the vulnerabilities of children born through assisted reproduction.
Do you want to clap once for us, one of you? Only one.
Together?
There you go. That'll be enough to line things up.